Hello, I'm John Chivacco, the co-chair of the NY-GEO 2023 conference and a board member of the New York Geothermal Energy Organization. I'd like to welcome you to this recording of a live presentation from the conference, a two-day event which was held in Albany, New York on April 26th and 27th of 2023. This year's educational sessions and keynotes represent the latest in ground source heat pump system design, product innovations, and installation practices, along with important policy, regulatory, financing, and incentive updates. This presentation is one of over 40 sessions from the two-day event, all of which were recorded and available at NY-GEO's website, www.ny-geo.org, along with session descriptions and a link to download the slides from each of the sessions presented. NY-GEO is proud to make this content available to our members and other industry stakeholders, and if you are a member, thanks so much for your support and participation. If you find this content valuable and for some odd reason you are not yet a member, consider joining NY-GEO at the appropriate membership level with details available at our website. The live recording from the NY-GEO 2023 conference will start in just a moment. Thanks so much for listening.
All right, everybody, our first presenter today is actually just provided us with a video. It's going to be a little bit of a history lesson, so it will take you back to, high school. We're going to do the birth of thermal utilities. This is going to be provided by Andreas, who has been in the game for a long, long time and is the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners like NARUC. He's in it. And I'm just going to see if I can press this button and make things happen. 1, 2, 3, go. And then I'll introduce the rest of the panel as soon as we wrap up Andreas's bit, because we have a pretty interesting, pretty cool panel up here today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I would like to start my presentation with a disclaimer, the mandatory disclaimer that to the extent that statements appear as opinions, they are solely mine. They do not represent the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, any of the agencies within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or any organizations that I'm affiliated with. And of course, any errors or omissions are my sole responsibility. I will start with the mandate. I was asked to explain the economics of gas utilities and how it would work for GEO in under 5 minutes, and that's not an easy task. But I will start with natural gas, which I'm very familiar with, and I have to remind everybody that right now, natural gas is the fuel of choice for heating purposes because of its price. It's significantly lower for heating purposes than the other options that are currently available to consumers. Regulation of natural gas is not as simple as it may sound. Natural gas is regulated on 2 levels, the federal and the state. The federal for any transaction that takes place across state lines, and the state for all transactions that take place within the state boundaries. And I will focus on the state, which in this picture is the right part that falls under distribution, while everything to the left of distribution, transmission, and production fall under the federal jurisdiction and federal review. According to PHMSA, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, in 2021, there were 2.3 million miles of local distribution pipeline. That some people may see as an opportunity, or other fuels. Others see it as a question of whether we can maintain the same system with those other fuels. That's something for someone else. That's above my pay grade, something for someone else to determine. The economics of utilities, and gas utilities in particular, is the reality that there's only one set of pipes in the ground. And it makes sense in terms of cost and in terms of franchises, that there's only one company that owns the pipes in the ground. And that, of course, makes it a distribution monopoly, and as such, it is subject to economic and safety regulation. That is, we look at the rates, we look at the infrastructure maintenance and expansion, and we also look at the obligation to serve versus the obligation to connect consumers. The safety of the pipelines is very important to both the utilities and regulators. How much should be invested to maintain the safety of the pipes, and how fast or how would it be recovered? The part obviously is all costs associated with the existence of the distribution system and the staff that supports this distribution system, and you see it in the transportation part of your bill. And of course, then on the local distribution level, it falls under the state, and everything that has to do with interstate transactions, it's federal. The market. What's the market now? It comprises five elements: customers, local distribution companies, marketers, pipelines, and producers. It will most probably not change under a GEO scenario. I'm not sure about pipelines because I don't know how far GEO can travel. So I have graded out, but the other four are definitely going to stay as they are. And the role of the utilities is also important to understand, that they have a dual responsibility both to investors and consumers. For most of us state regulators, the responsibility to consumers, that's why it gets 6 stars, is important. Of course, absent investors, there wouldn't be a market and there wouldn't be anything delivered to consumers. So they are both equally important to all of us. And of course, they are also responsible for abiding by state and federal laws. I look at the map of geothermal resources in the United States. I pulled them up from the Department of Energy. And unfortunately, it seems to me, I'm not a geologist, that for the most part, the eastern seaboard is not very well blessed, if you will, for geothermal. But that's up to geologists, not me, to determine. I will close with a couple of questions. The first question I have is, who determines why, when, or how consumers convert from natural gas? It seems that we all are having these conversations without actually looking at what the average customer wants. Again, this is something that the politicians will have, the elected officials will have to deal with, and not some state regulator in most states. We also need to make sure that the reliability, least cost, and safety, the holy grail of regulation, is maintained. Who's going to be responsible for monitoring the safety or even the reliability? What happens if the source does not perform, does not deliver? And the final question that we need to ask, is it safe for a pipeline to be repurposed? We know that it's not as safe with hydrogen. I don't know about other forms of energy. And the question that comes up with is at what cost and who paid for it? So we have a situation of feasibility versus economics. The final thought is, when we're talking about GEO, are we talking a single provider for a company, a local distribution company, or multiple providers, the competitive supply pool? Because if it's a single provider, then we're talking about moving back to the beginning of the 20th century and start regulating the price of the commodity in the production side. And with that, I'm done. Thank you for your time. My name is Andreas Stanos. I'm sorry I'm not here with you to answer questions, but you can find me on social media and shoot your questions to me. And no, there's no relation with the other Thanos. Thanks again. Be well.
All right, the rest of our panelists, again, I'm excited to introduce. They're here today representing 3 separate gas utilities, all of whom are proactively moving forward with geothermal exploration and projects. And they're going to talk a bit about how geothermal may potentially fit within the utility model. And they're also going to share, I think, the unique perspective and the unique resources that the utilities can bring to the party when it comes to expanding geothermal nationally. I'm going to start off with Holly Braun. She's from Northwest Natural. She's an exceptional human being. And I'll have you take it away, Holly.
It's really nice to be with you all. This is my first time at NY-GEO for some obvious reasons, coming from Portland, Oregon. And last night there was the talk of how far NY-GEO and the industry has come in 1 year. And I like to think back to how far Northwest Natural has come in the last year. And that's so, I mean, specifically as it pertains to GEO, probably in many other ways also. But that so much of that is due to the partnership and the relationships with many in this room. HEET, Eversource, and Vermont Gas would be 3 very specifics that come to mind, and of course all of our utility friends, but a lot of ongoing collaboration with those 3 parties. I won't focus as much on the opportunities. I think that part has become pretty clear. We need to decarbonize and we want to stay in business. And fossil gas releases carbon as it's combusted. So we realize that and we need an alternative. we are trying to understand if geothermal could be one of those alternatives, and the fact that it's pipes that are so similar. We've talked about the workforce that is similar, the fact that it's thermal energy underground. I mean, these are all aspects that make it pretty clear that there's alignment and that there could be great opportunity for us. We'll focus instead in this presentation on the challenges. Oh, that's not my timer. That's the timer for the whole thing? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, you're good. No, I actually, it's okay. 6 minutes. I don't know how to do that math. Okay, not while I'm talking at least. I think we're gonna be fine though. So let's go over some of the hurdles. And sorry that you're getting this all at once. I should have held them back and fed them one at a time. A little bit of caveat, Northwest Natural is not installing any of these systems. So really even just getting started, you've got hurdles before you can even begin. And the first one is more subtle, but I think it's really powerful and important. We are not thermal energy utilities yet, or I shouldn't say that, sorry. We're not geothermal utilities yet. We've been gas companies. We've been gas companies for a long time. This is part of our identity. We take pride in it. And so if you're going to shift that, it's important that you actually have the conversation explicitly to say, are you ready to become a thermal energy provider? Like, does that fit into your ethos and your mindset and how you see yourself? I mean, these are conversations I've had internally with top executives, and it was really heartening that the response was an emphatic yes, if we can solve the business model and the regulatory compact piece. So you'll see that these follow second as the next hurdles, that our business model is to sell least cost, least risk natural gas resource. So in order to still make money, we have to figure out how do you actually do this, because geothermal, historically has not been least cost, least risk. You could maybe argue that different ways. I think IRA is having the IRA is making a big change in that calculation. So does carbon policy. In our state, it's not prescriptive how we have to reduce, but we have to reduce emissions associated with the natural gas for our customers 50% by 2035. So in 11 and a half years, we have to cut emissions in half. It doesn't say how. So GEO could be a way to do that. And you could say, hey, that's least cost, least risk in order to comply with that mandate. So as policy is changing, that is helping us make the business case and understand the business model. But you also have to understand rate design. Not you have to, we have to. We have to figure out the rate design because today there's a variable and a fixed cost, but the fixed isn't actually what it costs us from a fixed standpoint to run our system, because we want to incent people to be efficient. So we put more of the fixed system charge on the volumetric rate. Well, going forward, is it just a fixed charge to be connected to the system, or is it volumetric? And what's the unit of measure? Is it square footage? I mean, we've talked about different ways this is being tried out, but in order to take this to scale, we know that we won't be able to do exactly what's happening in the pilots, where we're able to pay for everything at the customer side and everything on our side. I mean, to make this sustainable and scalable, we'll really have to figure out the business model that enables that and the rate design. And then finally, it's been mentioned, we are regulated as a gas company, not a thermal energy provider. So to take this beyond a pilot, we'll have to get overt, authority and approval to do that. Once you're actually moving and doing these further along than this, we found out from our peers that determining the study locations can be a challenge. And in a way, it's a good challenge because so many communities are lining up and saying, me, I want to be the spot. But each one of those feasibility studies is expensive. And so you have to have clear criteria on which locations do I move forward and how do I prioritize those. And we've had a lot of talk in this room today about workforce availability. So that's a hurdle that we know is real. And these people are incredibly athletic. So I think that's part of our key. If we can just be so strong and perseverant and train every day, that we can get there. And we'll get there better together. So Vermont Gas was kind enough to allow me to come out last July when they launched their utility thermal team. I said, please, can I come? She's like, yes, of course. And they were actually, there was a little bit of chocolate. I didn't tell her that though. And we found out at the end of that day that Vermont Gas and Northwest Natural might be in very different parts of the country, but we have the same questions. We're going to have to solve for the same challenges, so why not come together And not just us, but what about all these utilities? And I think more and more will come on over time. I should have titled this slide the Utility Network Geothermal Collaborative, because that's what we've formed. So I believe there's 12 utilities and the Gas Technology Institute who are at different points in the continuum from, curious about this, to researching it, which is where I would put Northwest Natural. Some have pilots submitted and are awaiting approval, and then some actually have pilots underway. And so we're all trying to learn from each other, and there is a common theme that none of us know the business model that makes this sustainable. So that is a real utility challenge. It doesn't mean, I don't feel like we have to have the answers today. We're just trying to all get on the same page with what are the real challenges in this. So I'll go through the list quickly. -5, 12 minutes? Okay, no. So the business model and rate structure we're trying to all solve together that is consistent and congruent with the utility investment profile. Utility investors love their really safe utility investment. Now, I don't know that we can guarantee that forever, but our investors have gotten a dividend every quarter for over 50 years. No CEO wants on their watch that they didn't pay that dividend. So this is like a high level of risk aversion. So we have to figure out, in whatever structure we do, that it's still pretty parallel to the typical utility investment model that we know today. You could do it different ways, but I'm saying in order to reduce friction and make this most likely, this is important. We need to help on ascertaining the best sites, on how to physically go about doing one of the projects, understanding the resources in this space, and HEET has been really incredible at sharing their very well organized library of resources to help all of us just move faster. If you can just go to these links and companies, and now we're gonna have a wiki. You guys are so brilliant, I love it. How we can work with the other GEO coalitions. So we are the gas utility one, but we recognize there is a group of regulators, I think, getting organized. There's labor being organized, and that this is a systemic problem, and we've talked so much about all the collaboration. All the parties need to come together. That list was 2 pages long, single-spaced, although there were bullets. But still, it's an impressive list of all the groups that need to come together. So we need to understand our role in this ecosystem and how we function together as an ecosystem to move forward. Regulation needed to help accelerate adoption, and then how to access funding that would be outside utility rates. And I'm not going through this slide, but I wanted you to have it for reference. This, again, Utility Network Geothermal Collaborative. We had our kickoff in December, and all of us, we kind of grouped ourselves into these 4 different categories and shared what our challenges and tailwinds that we were experiencing. And it was pretty consistent depending on where you're at in this progression. And so that will be in the slides that you'll all have access to. And I want to end by saying, let's create the future we imagine. There will be disruption. We know that. And I would rather go through the process of dealing with disruption at we've never done this before. What's the new rate structure on this? Well, we haven't installed these systems. Customers having to have the disruption in their home, but going through that kind of disruption instead of the intense climate catastrophe, which I know it's not one or the other. We're probably going to have some of both, but to the extent that we can be proactive and go after this kind of disruption, hopefully we're making a better future for everyone. It takes us all coming to the table, letting go of some ego, really listening to each other, and then I think we can make the future we imagine. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Holly. That was just as lovely as I would expect it to be. All right, dear audience, next up, I think he's winding down his tour of New York Geothermal. Third presentation of the session. Everybody, our one and only Owen from National Grid is going to present on, their perspective on the utility's role in network geothermal. So, Owen.
Great. Thank you very much, Morgan, for the warm introduction. It's a rare occurrence that I'm not the most animated speaker on a panel, so I find this to be a unique opportunity for me to learn from some experts here in the room as well.
Very subdued and professional.
professional.
So I'm Owen Brady-Trachek. I'm the director of the Future of Heat Solutions team at National Grid in our customer area. I was encouraged to hear Andreas' remarks at the beginning and how much he referenced the role of the customer and what the utility does. Ultimately, we are here to serve our customers and operate on their behalf in very close partnership and collaboration with the regulators that oversee the way that we do our work. And that continues to be a very important theme for us. And in fact, just going to Holly's point about sort of the emphatic support from leadership, I will say that while I was quickly scarfing down my lunch today between the various panels, I saw that Steve Warner, our Massachusetts president, had posted something on LinkedIn about a new article he had put in Commonwealth magazine about National Grid's commitment to network geothermal. So definitely something I encourage everyone to go take a look at, so you don't just hear me talk about it, you're able to hear it directly from our president of our Massachusetts jurisdiction. I'm going to talk a little bit about thermal energy networks, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think I see the utility being able to bring to the table. After 2 days here, no doubt you're all inspired and ready to do a whole bunch of work in the thermal energy network space, and so I want to think about how we can remove some of the barriers and help that happen more quickly. I will just say, I'm using the term thermal energy network, not network geothermal. When National Grid first started looking at this back in late 2016, early 2017, we sort of committed to the network geothermal term. But as we increasingly think about different sources of thermal energy, I feel like network geothermal is perhaps boxing us in a way that we might not want it to. So as we have these conversations, as we think about how to collaborate, we want to think about what is the most inclusive and useful terminology that clarifies exactly what we're describing. And we don't want to have any confusion with deep, high-temperature geothermal. And I know certainly there have been some folks that have sent enhanced geothermal incentives over to me and said, is this what we're doing? Can we leverage this? And I said, no, not exactly. So let's talk about what a thermal energy network is. And I like to break things down into groups of three. And so here there are three pretty clear buckets, in my opinion. First is customers. Again, we should begin and end with our customers in mind because we are serving them. Then there is the distribution infrastructure, the horizontal piping. And finally, there are those thermal resources that I was just referencing. And those could be energy extracted from boreholes. It could be connections to wastewater treatment plants. It could be solar thermal. It could be waste heat from process. It could be all sorts of different things, including potentially having electric boilers and chillers to condition fluid. There's a whole myriad of things. And if we think about each of these categories, the customer piece is reasonably well understood in terms of how to electrify customers. And critically, the work to electrify a customer that is connected to a thermal energy network is identical to the work to convert a customer who is not connected to a thermal energy network to electrified end uses. So any of the questions or challenges that we're going to face in all of the electrification scenarios going forward are going to be faced whether it's a thermal energy network or not. So we can think of that as being identical. The distribution infrastructure, this is predominantly sort of the 2 to 12 inch diameter piping installed in rights of ways going down the street, the sort of things that myself and the team at National Grid and my utility partners here have been doing for decades, if not more than a century. So there's a lot of understanding about how to put pipe in, how to make it work, how to co-locate it with other utilities. So that's something that's pretty well understood. Of course, pipe diameter, depth, where the pumping will go, all of that is going to vary. But nonetheless, this is a pretty well understood and therefore low risk element of developing the thermal energy networks, in my opinion. Then there's the thermal resources. And this is where things are different and where things can get a little bit complicated. Whether you're trying to drill and you're dealing with aquifers or drilling permitting, you're thinking about potential site contamination. If you're looking at a wastewater plant and they're thinking about what are the temperatures of their process, how is it all going to flow, whether you're looking at using surface water and you're worried about freezing a river or affecting the flora and fauna that might be in there, all of these things are pretty unique and not something that has been adapted and integrated at the scale that we're talking about here for thermal energy networks. So that's really the area of sort of the uncertainty. And again, Holly said that our investors like to have low risk investments. I would say all investors like to have low risk investments. It's just that some are willing to accept a degree of risk. So the customer and the distribution infrastructure segments of thermal energy network, in my opinion, are fairly low risk and fairly well understood. The question then becomes, how do we think about the thermal resource portfolio and how do we integrate it in the most efficient way? Coming back to why we do this, and these are some slides from John Shavacco, and I asked him, he said he's happy for me to use them. This is from Skidmore College, and you can see 4 buildings on their campus. If you look at the energy use profile across the 4 buildings, you can see they look pretty different, and certainly they're being used in different ways. When you combine them all together, though, you find they actually have a pretty balanced load profile over the course of the year. And some of the sessions we've been having at this conference talk about how there's a natural sort of balancing effect and an ability for this to be a form of energy storage for the buildings. So there's a 25% reduction in potential thermal resource, if we take the word loop out here and we just say thermal resource, of connecting the 4 buildings relative to each of those buildings going forward individually. So another way to say that is the distribution infrastructure facilitates a 25% reduction in the cost of the thermal resource. That's where there's benefit to having the distribution infrastructure, and that's where we can substitute effectively a low-risk investment in the distribution and connecting of customers in the place of potentially a higher risk and more complex investment in terms of the thermal resources. And we can make it so that we have the right amount of thermal resources for those customers. Now, the tricky thing about working with customers, and you've heard me say it in panels, you've heard others say it in different panels, is that not all customers are the same, right? All of us are individuals. We all have our own preferences. We're all at our own place in life and have various different conditions in which we're operating. So I took a screenshot of a neighborhood here in Albany, just sort of a random neighborhood, residential homes there. And I don't know if my animations are going to work, so you'll just have to see these pop up. But you could imagine the green stars being those folks that are really excited about renewable energy and want to be eco-conscious and want to convert to an electrified end use. You can imagine the blue ones being those folks who perhaps are a bit more resistant. Maybe they just bought some new mechanical equipment and are thinking, I don't want to give that up. And then you could have some folks who maybe are facing different conditions. They don't feel they have the financing access to be able to go forward, or they're not sure about the technologies. They might have other concerns that keep them from considering some alternatives. So this is just one neighborhood, but this is what we find when we go out there, is that everybody has different perspectives. Some folks are really ready to go, and other folks are much more hesitant for a variety of reasons. So, how can we work with all of these customers, and how can we meet the customers where they are? And at the same time, how can we, again, de-risk those investments? So if we zoom out just a little bit from this neighborhood, you'll see the neighborhood is just above it. Just down from it is a skating rink. We often talk about skating rinks as one of those sort of unicorn thermal resources where they're going to be doing a lot of cooling at the time, where heating energy would be valuable. So potentially you could interconnect that neighborhood to the skating rink, and wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? And you'd have one of those balanced load profiles. The challenge is interconnecting with a skating rink might be complicated. It might be owned by a different organization. You might have customers that are ready to go today, and the skating rink isn't ready to go until a few years from now when their capital cycle lines up. So how do we get over that, right? How do we not get paralyzed and just saying it looks really good on a map, but we don't know how to make it work for customers? Well, what I would suggest is if we put in the distribution infrastructure, and we have fluid that's circulating so that the customers that were represented by those green stars are able to go ahead now because they're excited about it, they could interconnect to the network. That means you have customers that are taking advantage of the highly efficient heating and cooling available from a water source heat pump system, and that it is available for other customers when they become ready. This could be accomplished by integrating, as I said, a heater and a chiller in the pump house so that you could keep the fluid within its design conditions. And then it would basically facilitate customers joining up. It doesn't have to be all at once. If we push for everybody to do everything at the same time, we are making the decision and we're making the investment planning significantly more complicated than it needs to be, which adds risk back into something that should theoretically be a relatively risk-free investment. And then ultimately, great, we've interconnected the skating rink. That might mean we could decommission the heater and the chiller. We could take them and redeploy them on the second project that's happening in this way. So then we have now an interconnected system, and additional customers are able to connect to it over time. And the utility would be there to manage the conditions of the working fluid, to work with the customers, to integrate with energy efficiency programs, all in the same way that we're doing today within our gas business. So that's why I think it's really important that we think about those three buckets that make up a thermal energy network, because if you combine them all together, it feels big and overwhelming and honestly, in some cases, quite, as I said, paralyzing, as opposed to being things on which we can take action today. The other thing I just wanted to speak to, and this was something that we had discussed on our prep call for this, was National Grid has long been a proponent of this being something that gets integrated into sort of the way our gas side of our business works. We are a combination utility, so we do have an electric business as well. But we do have a gas business in lots of areas that we serve as a gas-only utility or as a combination utility. So this is extremely generic. Please do not go and think that this is exactly how rates are established, but I wanted to put the simple math out here. You have the revenue requirement, which is the cost to run the system plus the depreciation of capital assets in the top of the fraction, and then you have the forecasted volumes in the bottom of the fraction. So you end up with a cost per unit volume, dollar per kilowatt hour, if Jared Rodriguez was sitting over there earlier. So if we want to do it in dollars per kilowatt hour, even if it's dollars per therm, we can make it work either way. So this is, again, how we forecast rates. Then there are true ups. And so basically, you can think of it as increasing the revenue requirement, such as through investment in infrastructure, will increase the cost per unit volume. The numerator gets bigger, unless it is accompanied by a corresponding increase in volume. So if you have both of them going up, things might stay roughly the same. If instead you increase the volume sold, but you keep the revenue requirement the same, then you would have your cost per unit volume go down unless there's a corresponding balance on the other side of the fraction. So when we talk about sort of how rates are being established, this is a sort of generic way to think of that process. So I wanted to talk about why, in addition to gas utility skills and sort of the ability to work with customers, why it might make some sense for gas utilities to have a significant role in thermal energy network deployment and ownership. So in a scenario where end uses are being electrified and additional assets are being added to the electric rate base, you have the volume of electricity being sold going up. Lots of things are being electrified. More kilowatt hours are being metered. You also have the revenue requirement going up quite significantly because you're adding the thermal energy network assets plus everything that goes into supporting electric vehicles and all of the other end uses. So both of those are going up. That might mean the cost per kilowatt hour doesn't actually change materially, depending on the scale of those two increases. So that could be a good thing, right? Electric rates stay roughly similar. However, when we think about the gas side of the equation, you probably have volumes going down because your space heating and conditioning is reducing the amount of gas sold. The revenue requirement remains to be seen. If there's an ability to sort of decommission some gas assets, then that could come down as well. If those assets are not decommissioned because it's an uncoordinated transition, you could have the revenue requirement remain the same or potentially increase, and that's where you get some of the rate pressures that have been talked about in various other panels. And so I put down TBD here to be optimistic. Flipping to the other side, though, if you imagine the gas utilities install the network geothermal to serve gas customers, and because of their role in it, we are able to retire gas assets. That second part is critical, right? It then starts to think about an integrated rate base for a gas utility. And we would have a situation where on the electric side, the volume would go up quite a bit. Many more metered kilowatt hours being sold to customers because they're potentially driving an electric vehicle, they're using a heat pump in their homes, so that volume goes up. But the revenue requirement wouldn't go up quite as much. Because it's a highly efficient geothermal system, right? We don't have the Falcon curve, as Dr. Bonacore was talking about earlier today. Instead, we have a much flatter load profile. We're able to meet it with existing assets. There's probably going to be some investment in T&D nonetheless, but it wouldn't be nearly as significant as it otherwise would be. And so that could actually lead to a situation where electric rates per unit volume could get cheaper. This doesn't mean customers are paying less per year necessarily because they're using more kilowatt hours, but electricity could get cheaper per unit volume. That's an exciting thing. You look at the gas side, we still have a reduction in volume sold, fewer therms, decatherms, MMBTU, or kilowatt hours, however we want to phrase it, going through the system. But we also would be able to have a decrease in the revenue requirement because we would be retiring some of those gas assets as we're transitioning customers over to thermal energy networks. So that's something where we would then potentially have gas rates being flat. And I say flat here rather than changing materially because you don't know exactly what the scale of those things are going to be. And so I'm just, again, putting forward a generic scenario where you could imagine that if those two things moved in lockstep, you would end up with rates effectively staying flat. It does, again, I want to stress, it is critical that it is the same customers. And so if in the scenario where the electric utility is owning the network geothermal, the same customers are transitioning and the gas assets are able to be retired. It's slightly different than the way I've described it here. But what I'm saying is you want to have an integrated plan for converting customers over to thermal energy networks. If you have the gas utility playing a key role in that, they're able to think through how do they do that. They become much more agnostic in terms of the capital investment that's made to serve the customers. And it can go back to, as Andreas had outlined for us at the beginning, the role of the customer and the will of the customer in terms of the way that they choose to meet their energy needs going forward. So those are my comments, and I think there'll be some Q&A at the end of the session. So I'll turn it back over to you, Morgan.
Thank you, Owen. I especially appreciate it whenever we bring the attention back to the customer and the importance of bringing them along at a pace that works for everybody, because it's going to increase our odds of success down the road. As a person who's dedicated my whole professional life to customer service, I can say that, like, the customers make the job really hard, and it would be a lot easier without them. So I'm glad Owen brought that to everybody's attention. We are obligated to serve a lot of folks, and we need to keep them happy and equipped with affordable energy. So last but definitely not least, we've got Nikki. Nikki, I don't know well yet, but I do know that she is largely responsible for one of the most beautiful pilot projects I've ever heard of. The Eversource project, where they're bringing network geothermal to a community. They're pairing it with weatherization and upgrading home energy equipment to be more efficient. It's just, well, I wish I was eligible for that pilot. It's just exactly the way you want to see the work done. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Nikki. And Nikki, you are not Owen.
All right. Thank you all for having us. I know I don't ad nauseum, but it's so unbelievable to be standing here in this room. And I'm sure everybody who came to the New York GEO before, the HEET organization and others saw this in the future. And here we are, to Holly's point, we're here now. So it's great to be a part of all of this. And Morgan, you may regret wanting to get to know me because I am a little, crazy from time to time, but always fun crazy, right? In a fun way.
Totally safe. We'll level each other out.
Exactly. So I wanted to take a little bit of a different twist on everything that's being talked about. And if you're one of the people that loves when thoughts converge or when groups of people converge, then I think this panel and probably this whole conference is the place for you. But wanted to talk a little bit about equity, both from like a macro level as well as the project level. And as Morgan said, we've been really focused on customer. That's a word, that's going to come up quite a bit, and I'm sure on the panel as well. And this is just a quick, very simple diagram of our composition for our pilot in Framingham in Massachusetts. And I know Eric Bosworth, who's in the back, gave a presentation about the update of the pilot, so I'm going to not go too deep into that. But I did want to focus on this piece because a few thoughts in the prior panels that came up were really around community engagement. Customer education, we used words like customer awareness. And to me, it's a qualitative factor, certainly. There's a lot of technical pieces you have to evaluate on where to site these networks, how to install things, what we're going to measure, that kind of data. But when you get into the customer and into the community, they're the people that are living with this system. They're the people that are going to be feeling the hopefully short-term, but pain of construction, right? When you open that road, you're going to be directing them on which one to take while it's being worked on, that sort of thing. So they're very impactful, and everybody, like Owen said, has different motivators. So what we had to do was really think about a way to maybe be a little bit different from our prior utility mindset, which was, touch points with the customer at regular intervals, but on pretty benign or familiar topics, I would say. For this, we took a whole grassroots approach. So we canvassed like we would if we were going to be doing a gas expansion project from years before. But we did this with geothermal materials. And I'm really proud to say that the gas customer team, who would have done this for gas projects, were the ones that sold this. So we talk about workforce transition quite a bit. And in the non-represented space, I mean, that was pretty amazing. They were both eager and excited to deploy some of the marketing skills they had already, found successful, but they were just doing it for a new technology. And they basically canvassed the area in Framingham that we're doing this pilot and got non-binding, but letters of interest from the customers over a weekend. And it is free. We are giving quite a bit away for free, and that's an incentive. But I will tell you, of the customers and homes and businesses that they visited, there was one person who said nothing is for free, and did not want to participate. I think they recently upgraded their HVAC, but most all the folks that we were able to get in touch with are participating in the pilot, have signed agreements to come on board with us. And they range from small commercial, as you can see here, to residential, but a great portion is low income. And we're really proud of that because I think, we think about siting, and there was a whole discussion earlier about, we really need to get tighter on those requirements. And then we ended the session with Ania on equity. And, if we make it a mandatory requirement, it will become part of that fabric of site selection criteria. And that's what we did. It wasn't a mandatory piece of our order from our regulatory body in Massachusetts, but we said, what better way to live the clean energy transition and bring this to other parties who may not always receive these opportunities than making it a mandate. In the area we're involved in Framingham is actually an environmental justice community for two components, for language and also for income. And so I'll talk a little bit about more on what we've been doing in the stakeholder outreach phases to accommodate those needs, to really make sure folks understand. But, did want to say that our composition of customers is primarily low income, which we're very excited about. So when we talk about what do we do for stakeholder outreach, and we found really successful, what's not really on here in spades is working with the community. So the city of Framingham has been a wonderful partner. They have a sustainability office, as many cities and towns do now, but to have just that one support function, and sometimes it is one person, that's not enough. You have to work through all of the channels of the city council, the mayor's office, the DPW came up earlier, right? And Eric and team will tell you we've still had to kind of continually educate, continually work with the city in different departments, but with that core group that really was engaged from the get-go and who we've maintained very regular communication with, they've been extreme partners to kind of help us navigate essentially city politics, which are very real in our line of work. And with that, we've been able to get connected to other parts of the community, including the Framingham schools, which some actually abut our pilot route. And actually, we just came off of a wonderful day. We called it Introduce the Girl to Engineering and Science. And basically, we ran a STEM project for 8th grade girls. And actually, Zeyneb in the audience was one of our judges, so we were really excited about that. And so the girls worked in groups of 5. They did a thermal cooling experiment. They were judged on a bunch of different criteria. And even if you didn't want to be a scientist or an engineer, or you felt a little gun shy, there were other opportunities to participate. The school was really thankful. We had materials translated into Portuguese and Spanish as well as English. And so, there were interpreters in these groups. There were special needs children in these groups. There were also talented and gifted students in these groups. And the overwhelming response from the teachers and the principal and staff were just, many of these girls don't work together, and they were working together very well. And coordinating without much intervention from the staff. So we think that, getting out and starting awareness about the project through different means has been key. And we've found as much as there will be bumps and bruises, we know there will be, but since we've worked on this with the city, we've been able to navigate quickly if we've run into them. And so, other examples of what we've done, and actually I don't think John Shavako is here, but he brought in a heat pump. We did have a small residential only meeting dedicated to the residents on, at the time, the potential loop. We ran it as kind of like a town hall style where we explained the concept, but then took questions, had them touch and feel the heat pump, come up to our entire team, which included consultants like CDM in the back who've been working with us all the way through, and our Eversource team. And it was really a nice opportunity for the community to ask anything that they wanted. And what I will say is, because we had been really doing a lot of outreach, their questions were pretty technically deep for homeowners that, you know, are not in energy fields. And so we took that as the ultimate compliment. They were using our materials, they were reading up on the technology, and they were very smart about what may be installed in their home. So we continue to think about ways to be creative about how to perpetuate the pilot, but also the technology, because these folks are brave warriors, right? This has never really been done in this networked fashion by utility. And so what we're excited about is now they'll be the ambassadors for the next go. And that's constantly what we're thinking about, is how do we make sure people can have a +1 customer experience, if you will. So anytime we could call up somebody and say, hey, what did you think? Could you tell the purported customer over here, you know, what your experience was and how great it was, ideally. So as we move through, we're really excited to, move into our construction phase. We should be going to construction next month in May. And, we have some things planned through different media. It's something we've been doing all along. Webcasts that are recorded so folks can access them at different times, in-person meetings, community engagement, where maybe we have like we're thinking about what sort of like turn-on party we can have at the end in the fall for the community after we've weathered all the construction, things like that, to get folks feeling good about the project and the people who are building and going to be operating the system. Because I think, and it's no surprise to anybody in the room, but sometimes the utilities have a different perception, and it's not always a good one. And so a part of this is rebuilding our brand, and it's been wonderful to have another offering to give customers. And with that, I did want to say one exciting piece of news, and it ties into the whole stakeholder outreach piece. The HEET team has been instrumental in really starting the narrative here. And so when we heard that there was DOE money out there, we could never be a lead applicant, certainly, but they were gracious enough to work with us in the city of Framingham and the CDM team, and we put forth an application to go procure that funding, and we just received word this week that we received it. So we're really excited by that. And it's going to be a continuation of the team here. So just a testament to the relationship, but a big shout out to the HEET folks and CDM and others who are working on this with us, because it's a big testament for the city as well. So, we talk about paths forward and how we can continue this equity thread. Owen and others have mentioned that these thermal networks can actually be ways to mitigate electric build out. They're a great, efficient form of electrification. And, if Eric already said this, I apologize for repeating, but, we've seen in our thermal modeling that because we're pulling off electric resistance, gas, and oil, we're actually not having, at least in modeling, an impact on the electric grid in the Framingham area. So that's pretty impressive. We were a little worried about that. We've been coordinating with our electric side of the business, but that's pretty impactful. And so if that proves out in actuality, what's going to be really exciting is how do you deploy those systems in places where you don't have a lot of electric headroom, or maybe you have constraints, but you still have goals and customers to support the electrification journey. And so, it comes back to equity, and that's the macro level for us. It's a bit of integrated planning. It's a bit of thinking about cost to customer, overall customer, and what the equity of that implies. And so I think if we can manage the build out both on all sides of the utility, it's incumbent on us to do that. And so is this a solution that you get just that much more out of by thinking about it from a different angle? So we're looking to see if that hypothesis, if you will, proves out in the pilot. So we also, I talked about siting criteria, putting those environmental justice communities in the name of equity first on your siting criteria list. That's how we're starting to think about this. A lot of our gas territory certainly covers communities that are that meet environmental justice criteria. So we're constantly thinking about affordability, how customers can get access as well. And so that's going to be part of our thought process forward. The energy efficiency story is important here too. There's a lot of opportunity out there to weatherize your home, to incent folks to do so, but not always taken advantage of. And so that's been part of our multi-pronged approach with customers in Framingham, because we obviously want the buildings to be airtight. And it's been amazing because it feels like progress in what's been, feels like quick maybe to some folks, but for us, we're just itching to get going. But that's a piece of the process, and it feels like the customers, they're seeing the progress we're all making together. And that's been a great pairing with the energy efficiency team who, is thinking about heat pumps from an air source heat pump perspective, not as much ground source. And we've internally talked about changing their thinking on that, and they're all in. They're excited. It helps towards their goals, and it's just another option to give customers to choose from. So I'll end with two other quick points because I don't know where the timer's at. But integrated planning is another big topic, and it feels like another common ground issue. I'm sure there could be debate, of course, on who should do this and how. But as a dual utility, really a triple utility with our water assets, but the gas and electric piece is really important for us at the moment, because we have the opportunity in the states we operate in to think about, well, what is the best holistic solution for customers that also provides an electrification, decarbonization solution that fits their needs. And so we're thinking about, the pilot here proved that out a little bit as a case point, right? We had to coordinate with electric before integrated planning was even a thing or a topic to talk about. And so now going forward, it's building that internal muscle memory on how to do this, what's an actual process we can get together to move forward on. And I think Morgan mentioned it, and Holly at the top. It's hard to change your cultural mindset when for so long you were driven to do it one way. A lot of times for the utilities, it's driven by regulatory and legal obligations. And so, it's a new way of thinking. I think folks are getting the hang of it as we think about just very high level initial steps. And again, it's been a beautiful, you don't get to see it as much on the outside, but it's been a beautiful networking and working together opportunity inside the utility from folks who maybe traditionally didn't talk and who are now thinking holistically about what solutions we can deploy. So there's a ton of opportunities, I think, out on the horizon. We're excited to prove out the concept through our pilot. And there's other, I'll call it like, second generation combinations that we could talk about too, whether it's pairing solar, thinking about resiliency and reliability. And so we're just really excited to get this data set to stay on theme today, and then say to our regulators, to our stakeholders and communities and customers, yes, we can do this. Yes, it makes sense. And we'll do so in a way that puts equity at the forefront and provides a clean energy option for our customers. So with that, I'll close out. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Nikki. I did a lousy job of cutting people short because I wanted to hear what they had to say. So our question time is limited. We started a little bit late. We probably have time for 2, and then hopefully our panelists will be generous with their time afterwards, and you'll be able to approach them individually. So I'm just going to leave it to Angie. Angie, you get to determine whose questions look the most, pressing.
I must have looked pressing
Yep.
on my face. John Thomas with WaterFurnace. Nikki, it sounds like your project's the furthest along. I'm curious if you've set a sunset date on when the natural gas distribution in the pilot project area would be shut off, or if there's a strategy on that. And secondly, how you're facilitating consumers' choices on installing contractors and the equipment that they're installing.
Sure. No, great question, or great set of questions. So I'll take the first one first. So what we're doing for our pilot, because this was filed, 2019, could that be? We tackled space conditioning. So any non-space conditioning load is not being converted to geothermal necessarily. So right now we have not set a sunset date per se on the gas system, and it's not all gas customers that we're converting either. So what we're looking to do is, space conditioning is the bulk of the load. So let's be clear, be impactful. But what we're looking to do right now is prove out the results, make sure that the customers like it, because we can't really put a date on. They have options to go back to either their existing heating systems, an air source heat pump, or other options if they, for whatever reason, really don't like the system they're on. And we did that on purpose because we had to indemnify them so they would come along on the journey. And our regulator, of course, asked about it as well. So for right now, the short answer is not yet. And I think the second question you were asking is about contractors who were...
Yeah, facilitating the customer's choices on contractors and equipment.
Sure. So what's unique about this pilot is that we actually own the heat pump. For this instance, we thought it would be easiest to have all under our control, the purchasing, installation, and operation of the unit. The pilot is going to be 2 heating and cooling seasons, so after that we'll have to figure out if there's an ownership change or what have you. But we do actively have now a heat pump installer network that our company is working on, and like I kind of alluded to, it's mostly focused on air source, but they do have, I'd say it's about 80%, 20% air source, ground source, because we do facilitate individual ground source heat pumps, but in this networked fashion, and not that that changes much from a heat pump perspective, but that's something, if this pilot is successful, we would look to ramp up to make sure that we're giving customers more and more options as they come.
All right, maybe one final question. So if you think you have the best question of all the questions, you've got the best question of all the questions then. Hit it.
All right, Sarah Griffith, Energy Solutions, and I appreciate your equity emphasis, and I'm wondering what your ideas are for incorporating equity organizations or communities into the decision-making process going forward.
Sarah, is that directed just at me, or you want other people to talk?
Well, I guess I was
Yep.
focused on you because
Sure.
you were focused on equity.
I
but
just don't want to
anyone
hog the
who
mic.
wants- Yeah, no, anyone who wants to answer
Okay.
it.
I'll start then. So no, it's a very good point. I think what we've been doing for this first go around, since it was our first, we tried to work with a couple of organizations locally at the beginning. So the Framingham Housing Authority is one low-income facility. There's a low-income elderly housing set of buildings that we're converting. So they were at the table with the city. But going forward, I do think there needs to be stakeholder involvement. I don't know that I have a very concrete plan on how that can happen just yet, but it is something we will need to think about because we have a backlog of communities that want us there. So we kind of, I guess what I'm saying is we're starting more with the towns and cities, and what we've done is look to them to say, who do you see as equity type organizations to bring into the fold? And that's worked pretty well. It doesn't mean that'll be the forever go forward, but that would likely be a place we would start. Anybody else?
Morgan, is it okay if we do one more back here?
I think it's okay with me. So if everybody's game to stick around, let's do one more back here.
Hi, Scott Oliver and NYSERDA. I get the one thing in this conversation I don't understand is that if you have customer choice, you have the most expensive option for consumers because you have to maintain 2 systems at the same time. You're building this thermal network and you're providing gas to everybody. So that seems the worst option for consumers because we're going to have to pay for both systems at once. How do you guys square that?
Trying to make the microphone work up here. I guess we could have grabbed the wireless one. So I'm assuming that was directed towards me because I saw your hand go up when I was talking. So I'll speak to my comments, and then, of course, we'll open it up to my fellow panelists here. I don't fundamentally disagree with your comment. Having 2 systems is going to be more expensive than having one. What I worry about, I suppose, in terms of having one system is if you are force-fitting a investment decision for customers that will be potentially capitally and operationally most efficient, but it might not be most responsive to those customers. And those are 2 fundamentally different things, right? So we have one thing that is sort of easily quantifiable in terms of cost, and then we have another thing that is customer experience, customer satisfaction, thinking through their desire for autonomy and agency in making energy decisions. So my suggestion is if we have an asset in place that is a 50-year piece of pipe and it has 5 years remaining on it, that would be a moment where if we installed an alternative, we would give ourselves 5 years of overlap before there became a moment when it was a necessary decision to take the gas pipe out of service for safety reasons, right? It still has useful life and therefore could continue to be operated. That does involve a degree of capital inefficiency, but it potentially means that when you get to the point where the decision needs to be made on what to do with the piece of gas pipe, you already have some customer buy-in, and therefore it is a more coordinated and less disruptive transition for the customers that would be served by that asset. That is, again, looking at having two systems operating at the same time. And if we can get to the point where it is 1 year to a pipe needing to be replaced, and every customer on the segment says, yep, we're all ready to go, and it works perfectly, and we get the sort of success that Nikki was talking about, where over a weekend everybody signs up, fantastic, right? Like, I think that would be a great way to do it, because it doesn't involve the two systems, and it ensures that we're doing this in a way that feels like it's a very clear cutover. I'm just saying, based off of the experience that I've had both in the thermal energy network space, as well as trying to get customers to convert to non-pipeline alternatives and assessing their interest in that, I haven't seen that degree of customer coordination happen, even when things are free. And so as we think about scaling this, we want to make it so that it is a customer-centric structure that will allow them to make the transition when they are ready. And we have to collectively, as a society, decide which of those things is the priority, right? Is it the capital efficiency, or is it creating those opportunities for customers and hopefully delivering those good outcomes of being able to right-size asset classes in response to customer decisions? Anybody else?
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Most important slide of the day, because the word champagne's on it.
And one small correction to that slide that's up there. We're moving the champagne up because it's towards the end of the day. We just so much gratitude to all of the amazing speakers and all the people participating. But we have one last session that ties it all together right after the coffee break, and we're going to have champagne and the declaration of thermalification and some gifts at 5 o'clock as soon as that session, at the end of that session.
All right.
And then we can all leave.